Hi, I'm Chief Justice Stephen Gonzalez of the Washington Supreme Court, and it's my pleasure to introduce this year's Award of Merit recipient, David A. Perez. Mr. Perez, a partner at Perkins Coie, has been heavily engaged in pro bono work with the ACLU and Seattle University's Korematsu Center for Law and Equality to protect the rights of protesters during the 2020 racial justice movement. Their work resulted in a temporary restraining order against the use of chemical irritants and projectiles. Mr. Perez continued working on behalf of protesters, arguing that the police had violated the order, resulting in a stipulated injunction and finding of civil contempt against the city of Seattle. Mr. Perez said, "After witnessing repeated and blatant violations of protesters' constitutional rights, we had to act." A nominator wrote, "David has raised the stature of lawyers in and amongst the bar and the entire community of Washington State. We all benefit from David's pro bono work." Congratulations, David, and thank you.
I nominated David for the Apex Award of Merit for his work on behalf of Black Lives Matter, Seattle, King County. David represented them after protests on behalf of George Floyd against police brutality resulted in the indiscriminate use of tear gas, pepper spray, foam tip bullets against peaceful protesters in the streets of Seattle. He decided to take this case pro bono because the First Amendment rights of protesters were so important to him.
Night after night, more protesters would come to the streets to demonstrate against police brutality, demonstrate for accountability. And night after night, they were met with yet more brutality. And there was no end to it. And I think the kicker for me was the city had promised to stop using tear gas. And then that Friday, they used it again. At that point, I knew we needed a court order. And so I texted Professor Bob Chang, the executive director of the Korematsu Center. I emailed the ACLU. And then that day, I also emailed 8 attorneys at Perkins Coie. Sunday at 11, we had a call. That night, we had a draft complaint. On Monday, we filed. And on Tuesday, we had a TRO. Temporary restraining order to prevent the city from using certain less lethal weapons without precise targeting of those against whom they would need to use the weapons. Before, they were just scattershot, just tear gassing an entire neighborhood, throwing blast balls like they were hard candy or beads at Mardi Gras. I mean, this was not proportional. And because one person's breaking a window doesn't mean you get to tear gas 1,000 people.
David is my lawyer in his leadership. Bringing that team together and representing us deserves, without question in my mind, the Award of Merit because of his courage. I know the police department can peacefully control crowds, and I know they can identify those who work against that. And they don't have to treat the entire crowd as though the entire crowd were violent protesters. Most of the crowd was not.
And there were many folks who felt unsafe protesting in Seattle, demonstrated in Seattle. This case was for you. This case was to make sure that I can take my 2 daughters, whom I would not have taken because I was too afraid of their getting hurt. Take your kids to protests. Take them to demonstrations. It's safe to do that in Seattle. And here we had a case that said the rule of law matters, and it says you can say, you can demonstrate, you could protest against police brutality without fear of more police brutality. The city decided to settle the contempt motion and agree to a revised order that to this day is the most comprehensive order in place throughout the nation.
This is not something new in David's practice. This is how David practices. And it's that kind of courage that raises the bar, raises the communities, and raises the community's understanding of what legal work is really all about.
Thank you first and foremost to our clients in this litigation. It was just so brave and courageous for them to step forward. It wasn't easy. But I also want to thank our teammates, the ACLU, the Fred T. Korematsu Center, and at Perkins Coie, and to my family, my 2 daughters, my son, and my wife, Elvira.